Clown in court. That's how Donald Trump mocked Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett inside the hearing room. But this wasn't comedy. It was war. 47th the President of the United States, sitting in the hot seat, facing allegations tied to over 3 decades of scandals. And across from him, Jasmine Crockett, armed with facts, fire, and a voice for millions silenced by injustice. In a nation where 62% of Americans say they no longer trust their leaders, this clash wasn't just politics, it was survival. It was truth colliding with power, and in that chamber, every word was a bullet, every silence, a scar. Trump laughed. Crockett didn't. The battle for justice had already begun. The hearing chamber shook, not from noise, but from the weight of words. Donald Trump leaned forward, lips curling into a smirk that cut sharper than any blade. His voice, booming, mocking, filled the air like smoke, choking every corner of the room. "Clown in court," he spat again, dragging out the syllables, savoring the humiliation. "That's all you are, Jasmine. A loudmouth, a performer, a disgrace pretending to know what justice even means." Gasps erupted from the audience. Some hid their shock. Others smiled nervously, as if unsure whether to laugh or recoil. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, dark and unwavering, like steel tempered in fire. She rose just slightly from her chair, her voice steady, sharp, and cold. "If speaking truth makes me a clown, Mr. President, then you've just confessed to being terrified of the circus." The chamber trembled. A few muffled chuckles broke through the silence, but behind them was a current of awe. Trump's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected her to strike so quickly, so brutally. "You're nothing," he roared, pounding the table. "You sit here pretending to fight for justice, while the real fighters, men, not children, build nations, win wars, lead history. You're nothing but a mistake, an accident in a suit." Every word was venom, every syllable, a bullet fired across the room. But Crockett didn't retreat. She leaned closer, her voice slicing through the chamber, each word deliberate, each pause a dagger. "Mistake? Accident? The only mistake here is a president who believes lies can outlast truth. The only accident is that you were ever trusted with power in the first place." The room gasped again, louder now. Cameras clicked furiously. Eyes darted between the two like spectators at a prize fight, waiting for the knockout. Trump's fists clenched. His face reddened. The calm, confident king of spectacle looked suddenly cornered, like a beast caught in the hunter's trap. And yet he pushed harder. "You dare lecture me? I've led this country. I've carried this flag higher than any of your pathetic voices ever could. You're just noise in a room built for giants." Crockett let him finish. She let the silence drag. She let the fury of his words hang heavy in the air until the tension was unbearable. Then she struck. "If this room was built for giants, Mr. President, then why does every word of mine echo louder than yours?" It was a blade across the throat of arrogance. Trump's eyes widened. The chamber ignited. Some clapped. Others jeered. But no one looked away. The two figures stood locked in a duel without swords, their weapons forged from truth and deceit, pride and defiance. It wasn't politics anymore. It was war. Every gesture, every breath, every syllable became a strike. Trump hurled accusations, twisting history, branding her unworthy. Crockett countered with precision, exposing contradictions, throwing his own words back at him like broken glass. The chamber became a coliseum. Spectators were gladiators of silence, drinking in the blood spilled by words. And then came the rhythm, an unrelenting exchange, faster, sharper, louder. "Fraud," Trump bellowed. "Coward," Crockett fired back. "Fake," he snapped. "Truth," she answered. "Clown. King of lies." The crowd gasped with every strike. Cameras blinked like lightning. The nation was watching not a hearing, but a battle for its soul. Trump slammed his hand on the table again, the sound thunderous, echoing through the chamber. But Crockett raised her chin, calm, resolute, her voice carrying over the chaos. "You can shout, you can mock, you can spit poison in every direction, but you cannot drown out justice. Not today, not here, not ever. The silence that followed was deafening, a silence heavy with shock, heavy with history. For the first time in that chamber, Donald Trump leaned back. His eyes narrowed, his lips pressed thin. He was rattled. Jasmine Crockett had drawn first blood, and everyone in the room knew it. The clash had only begun. But in that opening thunderclap, the war lines were drawn clear. Arrogance versus truth, power versus justice, Donald Trump versus Jasmine Crockett. And the world couldn't look away. This is just the beginning. If you crave every blow, every twist, every word that cut like steel, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now to Harrison's Stories, where justice speaks louder than lies. The silence hadn't lasted long. It couldn't. Donald Trump leaned forward again, eyes narrowing, voice sharpening into a blade honed on rage. "You think you won something, Jasmine?" he hissed. "You think one clever line makes you powerful? No, you're nothing but a puppet. A marionette pulled by strings you can't even see." The chamber recoiled. The word puppet rang heavy, venomous. Trump's hands sliced through the air as he spoke, his gestures wild, commanding. "You don't speak for justice. You speak for the machine. For the leftists who own you, for the lobbyists who pay you, for the media who write your lines before you even wake up in the morning." Gasps, murmurs. The narrative was changing, tilting like a ship caught in the storm winds. Crockett stood firm, but the pressure pressed hard. Trump wasn't aiming for her. He was aiming for the room, for the audience, for the history books. He pounded the table once more. "You want facts? You want truth? Here it is. Unemployment under me. Record low. Wages up. Stock markets soaring higher than ever before. And what happened after your so-called heroes took over? Inflation choking families. Borders wide open. Crime on every street corner." Every word was a hammer blow. Numbers, half true and twisted, filled the chamber like a flood. 4 million jobs lost in your district alone, Jasmine," he barked, jabbing a finger toward her. 4 million lives destroyed under your watch. And you dare stand there and pretend you're the savior? You're nothing but a fraud wearing a mask of justice. The figures were exaggerated, distorted beyond recognition, but they struck with brutal force. Spectators leaned forward. Senators shifted in their chairs. Even allies of Crockett looked unsettled, eyes flickering between disbelief and doubt. Trump pressed harder. "You're not fighting me. You're reading lines someone else wrote. You're a stage actor in a bad play, forced to play the role of the brave fighter, while real leaders, men who actually understand power, reshape the world." The word men lingered like acid in the air. An insult cloaked as truth, a dagger masked as rhetoric. Crockett's lips pressed thin, her jaw taut. But for a moment, just a moment, her silence gave Trump room to roar louder. He seized it. "You think the people follow you? Let me tell you what they really think. They see weakness. They see incompetence. They see a politician who'd rather posture for cameras than lift a finger to help them." The room tilted further. Whispers slithered across the chamber like snakes. Could it be true? Was Crockett just a showpiece, a firebrand with no substance? Trump saw the cracks forming, and like a predator scenting blood, he lunged. "You're a fraud, Jasmine, a fake revolutionary, a tool in the hands of bigger players. And when the cameras turn off, when the lights fade, you'll be forgotten, erased, a puppet without strings, collapsed in the corner." The venom was unbearable. It spread through the air, suffocating. Crockett's allies glanced nervously. One senator shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Even some in the crowd who had cheered her earlier now avoided her eyes as though Trump's spell had dulled their faith. The tension strangled the room. It was working. Trump leaned back, smug again, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous, like a serpent coiling before the strike. "History doesn't remember puppets, Jasmine. History remembers kings, presidents, leaders who dared to rise above the noise. And you'll be a footnote, a shadow, a name buried so deep in the dirt, not even your so-called justice will dig you out." The chamber was silent, the silence of a blade pressed against a throat. Crockett stood still, frozen in the storm of venom. the weight of numbers and lies pressing against her chest like chains. For the first time, doubt rippled across her face. It was subtle, fleeting, but the cameras caught it, and Trump saw it. He grinned. The predator believed the prey was breaking. But the truth? The silence wasn't surrender. It was the eye of the storm. The pressure mounted, the chamber suffocated, the audience leaned closer, desperate for her response. Trump had escalated, poisoning the room with doubt, twisting numbers into weapons, branding Crockett a puppet before the nation's eyes. And for a terrifying moment, it seemed to work. The question now burned hotter than ever. Could Jasmine Crockett survive the venom? Or would the puppet strings tighten around her until she collapsed? The world waited. The next move was hers. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her jaw tightened, her eyes burned, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked like thunder over a dry plain. "Puppet," she repeated, her tone slicing the silence. "Mr. Trump, if anyone in this room knows about being controlled, it's you. Controlled by your donors, controlled by your ego, controlled by your endless hunger for power." Gasps cut through the chamber. The word had returned, sharper, deadlier. Crockett leaned forward, her voice steadier now, every syllable dripping with conviction. "You wave numbers around like a magician with smoke and mirrors. But the truth is harder to bury." She raised a thick folder, its pages bristling with documents. "Here are the Department of Labor reports from your presidency. Yes, unemployment went down. But who benefited? The wealthiest 1%. The same group you cut taxes for while working families were left to struggle." The chamber stirred. The murmurs grew louder. Crockett didn't stop. She flipped another page, her voice rising with each revelation. "You talk about wages? Then explain why, during your administration, the racial wealth gap widened to its largest margin in over 50 years. 50 years, Mr. Trump. Black and brown families slip further behind while your friends on Wall Street pop champagne." Trump's smirk faltered, just slightly. Crockett pressed harder. "You throw around 4 million jobs lost in my district? Let's get real. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, your own government agency, Mr. Trump, the number wasn't 4 million. It wasn't even 400,000. It was 28,000. Tragic, yes, but you inflated it by over 100 times to make a soundbite. That's not leadership. That's lying." The crowd erupted in a storm of whispers. Several senators leaned forward now, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Trump's mouth opened, ready to retort, but Crockett cut him off before the words could escape. "You said history remembers kings," she snapped. "History also remembers tyrants, liars, men who thought they were untouchable until justice dragged their names through the mud. And let me be clear, justice always catches up." The chamber trembled. Somewhere a hand smacked against a desk in approval. Another voice muttered, "She's right." Crockett's eyes locked on Trump's. She didn't blink. "You say I don't speak for the people? Then tell me, why do the people you abandoned keep filling my office with letters, with phone calls, begging me to fix what you broke? Why do mothers tell me they're still struggling with the aftermath of your border policies? Why do veterans remind me of promises you made, then shattered?" Her words struck like arrows, each one embedded deeper. Trump shifted in his seat, his arms folding across his chest. For the first time, his laughter was absent, his silence heavy. Crockett seized the opening. "You think I'll be forgotten?" Her voice rose, cutting through the chamber like a bell. "Mr. Trump, the only thing history will forget are your excuses." The crowd gasped, then burst into restless energy, whispers, nods, nervous laughter. The balance of power was shifting. Trump's lips moved, but no words came. For a fraction of a second, he was gagged by truth. Crockett leaned closer, her voice low, intimate, but echoing across every corner of the hall. "You call me a puppet? I call myself a fighter, and fighters don't quit. Fighters don't bend to bullies. Fighters rise, even when the odds are stacked, even when liars shout louder, even when men like you believe power means truth." The silence that followed wasn't weakness. It was a silence of reckoning, the kind that made people lean in, hang on, crave the next word. And then, like a spark hitting dry wood, the chamber ignited. Voices buzzing, pens scratching, cameras flashing. The clash had turned. The counterfire had begun. Trump's face was flushed, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as though he could crush it into splinters. Crockett stood tall, unbroken, her folder still in hand, her presence towering like a flame that refused to be extinguished. The spectators knew. This wasn't just a battle of politics. This was a war of wills. A war where truth was suddenly swinging harder, sharper, stronger. And for the first time, Donald Trump wasn't laughing. The chamber braced itself. The storm was only growing hotter. Trump slammed his palm against the desk so hard the microphone screeched. "You're a liar," he roared, his voice booming like cannon fire. "Every word out of your mouth is twisted. You're not here for justice. You're here for revenge." Crockett shot back before the echo faded. "Revenge? No, Mr. Trump. This is called accountability, something you've spent your entire life running from." The chamber gasped. The sound of her voice was sharp, clean, surgical. Trump's face reddened, his lips curling into a snarl. "You think you're tough? You think you're smart? You're a nobody. You'd still be invisible if it weren't for me. My name, my presidency, my power. Without me, you're nothing but a footnote." Crockett's reply came like lightning. "And without the people, Mr. Trump, you're nothing but a fraud in a suit, a king with no crown, a man terrified of being seen for what he really is." The words collided like steel. The air trembled with their clash. Senators on both sides shifted, some shouting for order, others urging them on. One voice barked, "Mr. President, please," while another hissed, "Congresswoman, enough." But neither stopped. Neither could. Trump's finger jabbed at the air. "You're tearing this country apart with your so-called crusade. You don't want unity. You want power. You want chaos." Crockett leaned forward, her hands slamming against the table in rhythm with her words. "No, Mr. Trump, you thrived on chaos. You needed it. You fed on it. Every scandal, every insult, every division, it made you stronger. But chaos doesn't build nations. It destroys them. And America is still bleeding from your reign." The chamber shook under the weight of her words. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked like machine guns. Trump bellowed again, his voice cracking with fury. "You dare lecture me on leadership? I built empires. I ran the world. People feared me." Crockett didn't hesitate. "They didn't fear you, Mr. Trump. They feared what you represented. Corruption, lies, greed. Fear is not respect. Fear is not strength. Fear is weakness, dressed up in a red tie." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Others jeered. The hall had transformed into a battlefield. The words their weapons, the spectators their soldiers. Trump's voice climbed higher, desperate now, almost unhinged. "You're nothing but noise, Jasmine. Just noise. You don't create. You destroy. You'll never rise beyond this room." Crockett's eyes blazed. "Then why, Mr. Trump, does every word I say strike you like a blade? Why do you shout louder every time I speak? Because you know the truth. You know your empire is cracking. You know your lies are collapsing. And you know, deep down, you can't silence me." The words sliced the air. Trump froze for a heartbeat, his mouth open, no sound escaping. Senators rose from their seats, some yelling, "Order!" Others waving their arms. The chairman's gavel slammed again and again, its sharp cracks drowned beneath the storm. The battle raged on. Trump barked accusations, hurling insults like fireballs. Crockett deflected each one, her counterstrikes fast, fierce, relentless. "You failed," Trump roared. "You lied," Crockett snapped back. "You betrayed this country. You poisoned it first." Every sentence collided with another, the sound deafening, the rhythm unstoppable. The room became a furnace. Sweat glistened on brows. Hands gripped desks and papers and microphones, as though anchoring themselves in the storm. The fight had escaped the rules, transcended the boundaries of the chamber. This was no longer a hearing. This was survival. Trump's chest heaved, his face flushed crimson. Crockett's voice cut sharper, steadier, fueled not by rage but by something heavier. Justice. The difference was clear. One fought to dominate, the other fought to defend. The audience saw it. They felt it. They couldn't look away. One senator whispered, "This is history," though his words vanished beneath the roar. The chamber had become a war zone. Every eye burned toward the center. Every ear caught the clash of words, the thunder of two wills colliding. And as the storm raged, one truth became undeniable. Neither would surrender, neither would fall back. This was not just a clash of voices, it was a clash of legacies. The gavel slammed again, splintering under the force. But even that sharp crack couldn't cut through the storm. The chamber wasn't under control anymore. It belonged to the battle, and Trump knew it. He leaned back, chest heaving, then suddenly straightened, calm, collected, eyes gleaming like a hunter who had just spotted his kill. "You want truth?" he sneered. "You want proof?" From beneath the desk, he pulled a thick envelope, stamped with a bold red seal, the kind that screamed classified, the kind that made cameras zoom in, senators freeze, and whispers break like waves. "This," Trump declared, holding the envelope high for all to see, "is what Jasmine Crockett doesn't want you to know." The room erupted. Chairs scraped, pens dropped. Even the chairman leaned forward, his face pale with disbelief. Trump slid the papers from the envelope with deliberate slowness, like a magician revealing his final trick. He slapped them onto the table. Pages scattered like falling blades. Internal memos, leaked reports, evidence that Congresswoman Crockett has been coordinating with outside groups, foreign groups, while pretending to fight for justice. Gasps shot across the chamber like sparks. The word foreign alone was dynamite. Trump smirked, savoring the panic. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, she talks about justice. But behind the curtain, she's nothing but a traitor to her people, a traitor to her country." The chamber fractured. Some senators leaned toward Trump's papers, eyes wide, nodding. Others shook their heads, muttering protests drowned in the noise. Jasmine froze. Her hands tightened around the folder she still held, her knuckles pale. For the first time, the certainty in her gaze wavered. Trump saw it and pounced. "You want numbers? Fine. Here's one. $250,000. That's the payment listed right here, to an organization overseas, funneled directly through accounts linked to your allies." He jabbed a finger at the page, though no one had time to verify what it really said. It didn't matter. The suggestion was enough. $250,000, Trump repeated, louder now, letting the number reverberate like a hammer. Blood money. And she dares call herself a warrior for justice? The crowd rippled with uncertainty. A senator muttered, "Is this true?" Another whispered, "This could end her." Trump grinned, basking in their doubt. You see, it was never about justice. It was about control, power, money. Jasmine Crockett is nothing but a puppet for the highest bidder, and the evidence is right here, in black and white. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his laugh rumbling through the chamber like thunder. The sound chilled the room. It wasn't the laugh of a man under attack. It was the laugh of a man who believed the battle was already over. Crockett stood rigid. She wanted to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The weight of the chamber pressed against her chest, each whisper carving deeper into her silence. Trump leaned forward, voice dripping with triumph. "Face it, Jasmine. You're finished. The game is over. Your mask has slipped, and history won't remember you as a fighter. It'll remember you as a fraud caught red-handed." The crowd buzzed louder. Reporters scribbled frantically, some already drafting headlines in their minds. Crockett linked to foreign groups. Secret payments unveiled in shocking hearing. Trump's allies smirked, emboldened by the sudden shift. One even clapped, the sharp sound echoing in the tense silence. For Jasmine, the pit opened wide beneath her feet. Every eye bore down on her, some with pity, some with suspicion, others with cold judgment. Her reputation trembled on the edge of collapse. The very thing she had fought to protect, her credibility, her cause, her voice, now dangled by a thread that Trump was ready to sever. He leaned closer, his whisper amplified by the microphone. "Checkmate, Congresswoman." The words dripped with venom, with certainty, with finality. And in that moment, with the papers spread across the table like daggers, with senators shifting toward Trump's side, with the chamber drowning in whispers of betrayal, it felt like he was right. The storm had turned. The hunter had sprung his trap. And Jasmine Crockett stood at the edge of defeat, her future balanced on the sharpest blade of doubt. The silence was suffocating. Every eye fixed on Jasmine Crockett as the so-called secret file lay on the table like a loaded weapon. Trump smirked, leaning back in his chair, certain victory was his. But Jasmine didn't crumble. Her fingers brushed the folder, slow and deliberate, as if she were touching the very edge of a blade. Then she lifted her gaze, steady and unflinching, straight at Trump. "This," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tension, "isn't a bombshell. It's a fabrication." The words dropped like stones in water. Ripples spread instantly across the chamber. Trump laughed, loud and mocking. "A fabrication? That's the best you've got. Everyone in this room can read the numbers. They don't lie." But Jasmine was already flipping through the pages. Faster now, her eyes scanning, dissecting. She pointed to a chart. "To anyone else, these numbers look convincing. But look closer. These figures don't match the official records from even a month ago. The formatting, off by a single line. The source, an agency that doesn't even exist anymore." The murmurs rose, louder this time. Senators leaned forward. Reporters' pens froze mid-sentence. Trump's smile twitched. Jasmine pressed harder. "You wanted shock value. You wanted the room to gasp. But you forgot something, Mr. Trump. Truth leaves fingerprints. Lies leave cracks." Gasps echoed as she slammed her finger down on a highlighted section. This signature, supposedly from a government director. Yet this director resigned 2 years before this document was signed. A wave of disbelief surged through the chamber. The ground shifted under Trump's feet. He tried to cut in, voice raised. "Fake news, twisting facts, that's all you do." But his tone betrayed him, shaky, defensive. Jasmine didn't give him air to breathe. She snapped another page forward. "This watermark? Outdated. It hasn't been used on classified papers since 2015. You brought a counterfeit into this chamber, Mr. Trump, and tried to pass it as gospel." The room erupted. Senators turned to each other, whispering, gesturing wildly. Some even laughed, shaking their heads at the audacity. Trump slammed the table with his fist. The thud cracked through the air, but it couldn't drown out the truth already unleashed. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice now a thunderclap. "You wanted to bury me with lies. Instead, you've buried yourself." The eruption of sound was deafening. Applause, gasps, shouts, all colliding in a storm of disbelief and exhilaration. For a fleeting moment, even Trump was silent. His face flushed red, his jaw clenched. This was not the script he had written in his head. Jasmine seized the silence and drove the blade deeper. "You call me a puppet, but who pulls the strings when you need forged paper to hold your arguments together?" The crowd roared again. Even the cameras seemed to buzz with electricity, capturing every flicker of her defiance, every tremor of his anger. Trump tried again to shout her down, but every word he spoke now landed weaker than before. Each syllable sounded less like power and more like desperation. Jasmine's tone, meanwhile, only grew sharper. "The people deserve better than theater. They deserve the truth. And no matter how much noise you make, you cannot silence it." Her words carried weight, not just the weight of facts, but of something more primal. Conviction. It hit the chamber like a tide, lifting her supporters, drowning his momentum. The duel had turned. The weapon he thought would end her became the chain tightening around him. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's trembling hand. He was gripping the edge of the table, white knuckles straining. And then, as if to punctuate his defeat, Jasmine held the file high for all to see. "This is not evidence. This is evidence of desperation." The chamber exploded again. Shouts, claps, pounding fists on desks. Reporters scrambled to send headlines flashing across the nation. Trump's voice, once booming and dominant, was drowned completely. Jasmine lowered the file, calm once more, eyes blazing like a fighter who had taken the heaviest blow and turned it into fuel. She was no longer just defending herself. She was leading the charge. And as the chaos surged around them, One truth cut through clearer than ever. Trump's trap had snapped shut on himself. The battle wasn't over, but the momentum had shifted. The chamber was alive, breathing in her defiance, exhaling his unraveling. The fight was still raging, but now it was Trump who looked cornered. Jasmine Crockett had shown the world that courage and clarity could carve through the thickest fog of lies. And as the chamber roared, millions beyond those walls leaned closer, hooked to every word. Because this was no longer just politics. It was survival. It was fire against fire. And the blaze was only spreading. So if you've been holding your breath, don't let go yet. The next twist will leave you stunned. Stay locked in and make sure you never miss what comes next. Subscribe now to Harrison Stories, where justice speaks louder than lies. The chamber was still vibrating with the aftershocks of Jasmine's revelation. Trump's secret file lay exposed as a sham, its power stripped bare. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She had tasted blood, and now she was going for the jugular. Her eyes locked on Trump, cold and unwavering. Since we're talking about truth, let's expand the scope, shall we? The crowd shifted in their seats, a new ripple of anticipation running like electricity through the air. Trump adjusted his tie, his face flushed. Jasmine's voice sharpened into a spear. You accuse me of being a puppet, of being weak, of having no backbone. But what about you? Let's talk about your contradictions, Mr. Trump. Let's talk about your scandals. The word scandals hit the chamber like a detonator. Gasps, whispers, a sudden intake of breath. Trump's jaw tightened. Don't go there, he barked. But Jasmine had already gone. She was slicing deeper. You speak of integrity, she said, her tone dripping with fire. Yet time and time again, your record speaks otherwise. You call yourself the champion of the people, but you leave trails of broken promises, bankruptcies, and betrayals. Her words landed like hammer blows, one after another. The rhythm was relentless, the pressure suffocating. Trump tried to interject, but his voice cracked under the weight of her momentum. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead, caught by the cameras, magnified for all the world to see. Jasmine leaned forward, not giving him a breath. You want to talk numbers? Fine, let's talk numbers. 6 bankruptcies under your leadership, billions lost, families ruined, investors gutted. That's not leadership. That's destruction. The room buzzed, the sound swelling like a storm gathering strength. Trump's fists clenched, but his silence spoke louder than his bluster ever could. Jasmine struck again. You preach about law and order, yet your own administration was riddled with indictments, investigations, guilty pleas. 34 convictions, Mr. Trump. 34. The number hung in the air like a blade. 34. It echoed. It pierced. Trump shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. The sweat was no longer a shimmer. It was streaming. The chamber was glued to her now. Not one senator dared interrupt. Not one voice rose to cut her down. Because this was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. Jasmine's tone softened for a brief, cutting moment, only to make the blow land harder. You say I am unfit to stand here, unfit to lead, unfit to speak truth. But what about the tapes, Mr. Trump? The scandals that still haunt you? The words you wish the world had never heard? The chamber gasped again. Everyone knew what she was alluding to. Everyone remembered. Trump's lips parted, but nothing came. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened again. The words were gone. Jasmine pressed forward, relentless. You call me a puppet, but I've never needed a script to face the truth. You call me weak, but I've never hidden behind fake documents and distractions. You call me dishonest, but every time you speak, the shadows of your past scream louder than your voice. Her voice rose, filling the chamber, shaking its very walls. This isn't about me anymore. This is about every American who has been misled, betrayed, and left behind by a man who claims to be their savior while profiting off their pain. The eruption of sound was volcanic. The chamber roared, the air splitting with applause, outrage, disbelief. Trump's face was crimson now, his fists trembling on the desk. For once, the man who thrived on chaos had no control over it. The chaos was swallowing him whole. Jasmine stood taller, her presence radiating through the room. The hunter had become the hunted, and the hunted was crumbling. Leadership is not built on lies, she thundered. It is not built on scandals. It is not built on intimidation. It is built on truth. And tonight, Mr. Trump, you've run out of it. The last words cracked like thunder. The chamber shook with the force of them. Trump's attempt to respond was drowned in the noise. The cameras zoomed in on his strained face, his faltering composure, the sweat dripping like evidence of defeat. Jasmine had seized the floor, the spotlight, the narrative, and she wasn't letting go. The chamber was no longer his arena. It was hers. Every sentence she fired tightened the grip around his contradictions. Every revelation dragged his scandals back into the light. Every word etched deeper into the consciousness of those watching. Trump was trapped not by her accusations, but by his own history. And Jasmine Crockett had turned that history into her weapon. The room stood still in awe, in fear, in exhilaration. The silence between her words was louder than any of his shouts. This was not just a comeback. This was dominance. And in that moment, there was no question. Jasmine held the chamber. She held the nation. And she held Donald Trump on the sharpest point of her blade. The strike had landed, and the world was watching him bleed. But Trump wasn't finished. He couldn't be. With the weight of history pressing on his shoulders, he roared back with a guttural force, his voice cracking through the chamber like a beast cornered. "This is a witch hunt," he thundered, veins straining against his skin. "They've been after me since day one. They're after you, not me. They want to take your freedom, and they're using her, this puppet, to do it." His finger jabbed across the table at Jasmine, trembling with fury. Cameras flashed. Pens scratched against paper. The spectacle was no longer a hearing. It was a battlefield broadcast live to millions. The audience gasped, split between disbelief and raw fascination. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like a held breath waiting to explode. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her silence was deliberate, a pause sharper than any rebuttal. She let his rage echo, let his words hang heavy in the air until they collapsed under their own weight. Then she moved, one step forward, one breath in, and with a voice like tempered steel, she struck again. "You call this a witch hunt?" she said, her tone steady but piercing. "No, Mr. Trump. This is accountability. This is what happens when a man thinks he can bend truth, law, and morality around his ego. You're not a victim. You're a perpetrator." The chamber ignited. Applause thundered from corners where only silence had lived moments before. Gasps shot through the room like sparks on dry grass. Trump slammed his fist against the table, the wood rattling beneath the blow. "This is fake. All of it. Lies, lies, lies." But his voice broke on the third lies. It cracked like a crumbling wall, the facade shattering for all to see. Jasmine pounced. "You say lies as though repeating it will make the truth disappear. But every indictment, every conviction, every tape, every record, they don't vanish with your denial. They stand. They remain. And tonight, so does your shame." The words hit like hammers against stone. Every syllable chipped away at the crumbling fortress of his defiance. Trump tried to laugh, but it came out hollow, a sound brittle and forced. The sweat had become rivers now, cutting down his cheeks, betraying the weakness he fought so desperately to hide. The chamber was no longer his arena. It was hers. Jasmine commanded the floor, the narrative, the very pulse of the room. Her hands sliced the air as she spoke, punctuating each word with the weight of inevitability. "You can scream. You can pound the table. You can call me names, call me a puppet, call me anything you want. But the people watching, millions across this country, see you for what you are. And no amount of shouting will drown out the truth." What? The chamber erupted once more, the sound deafening, like thunder rolling through the walls. Reporters typed furiously, their headlines already forming. Trump cornered. Crockett strikes back. Trump rose to his feet, his chair screeching backward. His face was fire, his voice raw. "You're tearing this country apart," he bellowed. Jasmine didn't back down. Her chin lifted, her eyes blazing. "No, Mr. Trump. You did that when you chose division over unity, profit over people, power over justice. Don't you dare blame me for the fractures you carved into this nation." The words were knives, and each one found its mark. Trump staggered, his fury clawing for purchase but finding none. The audience leaned forward, some on the edge of their seats, others clutching at their chests as though their hearts couldn't bear the strain. The air was hot, suffocating, alive with the electricity of confrontation. Jasmine's voice rose again, a crescendo building to its breaking point. "You call yourself strong, but strength isn't measured in how loud you shout or how hard you slam your fist. Strength is measured in integrity, in truth, in the willingness to stand even when it's hard. And on that scale, Mr. Trump, you've already failed." The room exploded. It wasn't applause anymore. It was eruption. It was chaos. It was history being made in shouts, gasps, and disbelief. Trump's lips moved, but the sound was gone. For the first time, his voice was drowned, swallowed whole by the tidal wave of reaction against him, and Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her words echoing in every corner, her presence burning into every soul. The clash had reached its peak. The storm had broken. The chamber was no longer a hearing room. It was a crucible, and in that crucible, Trump melted. Jasmine burned brighter. The air tasted of victory, of defeat, of something irreversible. And no one in that room, no one watching across the nation, would ever forget it. But Trump wasn't done. Cornered men never are. His voice erupted again, raw and frantic, clawing for control like a drowning man reaching for air. "You think this is me? You think I did all of this? No. It was my advisors, my staff, the corrupt deep state working behind my back. They're the real liars. They're the ones who betrayed this country." Gasps tore through the chamber. Trump's hand slammed the desk, his finger stabbing the air like a blade. "They're hiding in the shadows, manipulating everything. And now they send her, Jasmine Crockett, to finish the job. She's not here for justice. She's here to destroy your freedoms, your families, your America." The words thundered across the room, wild and reckless, a storm born of desperation. And for a fleeting second, just a second, the chaos seemed to shift. Murmurs rose among the crowd. A few heads nodded. The seed of doubt had been thrown into the soil of fear. Trump's chest heaved, his face blazing red. Sweat streamed like rivers, but his grin cracked wide, feral, triumphant. He thought he had turned it. He thought the tide had shifted. The chamber trembled with confusion. Order teetered on the edge of collapse. Even the senators looked uncertain, glancing at one another with furrowed brows. Could he be right? Had Trump, against all odds, found a way to claw back control? The moment was electric, unbearable, like watching a coin spin endlessly on its edge. No one knew how it would fall. And then, silence. Jasmine Crockett hadn't spoken. She hadn't moved. She stood frozen in place, her eyes locked on him, unblinking, steady. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The silence before the thunder. The silence that made every person in the chamber lean forward, hearts pounding against their ribs. Trump filled the gap, mistaking it for weakness. "You see?" he roared, his arms flung wide like a prophet calling down fire. "She's got nothing. Nothing. That's why she's standing there mute. Because I've exposed her for what she is. A fraud, a tool, a clown in court." The phrase cut back through the air. The same insult he had hurled at her at the very beginning. The circle was closing. The theater was reaching its edge. His voice cracked again, but his eyes gleamed with a manic fire. The desperation had transformed into something unhinged, untethered. The chamber was his circus, and he was the ringmaster in freefall. And yet, beneath the noise, beneath the shouts, beneath the chaos, something deeper churned. Jasmine's stillness wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was coiled strength. The audience could feel it. They could taste it in the air like static before lightning. Something was coming. Something final. Trump didn't see it. Or maybe he did, but he couldn't stop himself. He lunged forward with one last tirade, words spilling like venom. You're nothing but a puppet. You've always been a puppet. And when this country burns, it'll be your face they remember, not mine. His voice shredded itself raw, echoing through the chamber like a desperate howl. He stood there panting, chest heaving, sweat dripping, eyes wild. For a moment it seemed like he had thrown everything on the table. Every excuse, every accusation, every desperate illusion. And the room, stunned, breathless, fractured, hung in the balance. Trump's grin flickered again, faint but certain. He thought he'd done it. He thought he'd survived. But across from him, Jasmine Crockett finally moved. Her chin lifted, her lips parted, her silence ended. And the chamber knew, before she even spoke, that the blade was about to fall. The storm wasn't over. The storm had only just begun. The chamber was no longer a stage for debate. It had become a battlefield where silence cut deeper than screams. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her eyes ablaze with the fire of every injustice she had fought before. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer force of what she was about to unleash. Across the table, Trump leaned forward, fists clenched, sweat glistening at his temples. He could sense it coming. The crowd could sense it too. The air was so heavy it threatened to crush the room into dust. And then, she struck. With a slow, deliberate motion, Jasmine lifted a thick folder. Its edges were frayed, its pages swollen with evidence. But it was not just paper. It was the culmination of every truth his empire of deception had tried to bury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice slicing through the chamber like a blade of ice. "This is the end of the lie." Trump barked out a laugh, harsh, desperate, jagged. "Fake. All of it fake. Another setup. Another witch hunt." But his voice cracked at the edges, thin and brittle, betraying him. The mask was slipping. Jasmine opened the folder and pulled out a single page. Her fingers tapped the microphone, the sound echoing like a drumbeat of judgment. "This document," she said, holding it high for every eye, every camera, "comes directly from your own office. Signed, sealed, and now revealed." She read aloud, word by damning word, each syllable a hammer smashing into his fortress of denial. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't rumor. It was ironclad proof. The crowd shifted. Whispers grew into gas. And then the gas fused into a roar of disbelief. Trump's face drained of color. He leaned back, mouth open, eyes darting across the room as though searching for an escape. But there was none. "You knew," Jasmine pressed, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "You knew the truth, and you buried it. You built your power on sand, on shadows, on lies. And now every brick of that tower has crumbled." Trump slammed a fist on the table. "Lies! I never, this isn't." But the words faltered. His throat tightened. The once commanding voice that had bent millions to his will had turned into a fractured whisper. The world was watching him unravel. Every camera lens zoomed closer, hungry for the moment history would record forever. The downfall of a man who thought he could outrun truth itself. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. For a moment, time froze. It was no longer about politics, no longer about power. It was justice staring down deceit. And then she delivered the line that shattered the chamber. "This is not my word against yours. This is your word against the truth." The silence afterward was deafening. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. And then, an eruption. The chamber exploded with applause, cheers crashing like thunder against the walls. Reporters leapt to their feet, flashes blinding in every direction. Voices shouted over one another, but none could drown out the truth that had just detonated. Trump sagged in his chair, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of defeat. His lips moved, fumbling for excuses, for denials. But nothing came. He was speechless, stripped bare, crushed beneath the evidence he could no longer outrun. Jasmine stood unmoved, her expression carved in stone. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply let the roar of justice wash over her, let the tidal wave of vindication fill the space he had tried to poison with lies. In that moment, the world had chosen. Truth had triumphed, and Trump, once untouchable, was left trembling in the ruins of his own empire. The sound of the applause grew, wave upon wave, until it felt like the very foundation of the chamber would split apart. And through it all, Jasmine remained still, her voice finally rising above the storm, soft yet thunderous. This is what justice looks like. The cameras caught every word. The people carried it like fire. And no one could deny the final blow. Trump's body slumped in the chair, shoulders collapsing inward. The man who had once roared like a lion, now reduced to a hollow echo of himself. The cameras drank in his silence, magnifying every tremor of his lips, every flicker of panic in his eyes. For years he had projected invincibility, but now the armor had shattered. The image of power was gone. All that remained was the raw, naked face of defeat. He tried to speak, tried to summon the familiar cadence of bravado, but his voice betrayed him, cracking in half like glass beneath a hammer. Every denial sounded thinner, every excuse weaker. The empire he built on noise could no longer shield him. And then Jasmine rose. She didn't rush. She didn't bask. She simply stood, slow and deliberate, every movement radiating a calm that was more powerful than any shout. The crowd hushed. Even the storm of applause quieted, drawn into the gravity of her presence. She looked like something more than human in that moment, an unyielding figure cut from the same stone as legends. A warrior who had fought in shadows and emerged into the light, unbroken, unstoppable. Her eyes swept across the chamber, not in triumph, but in solemn acknowledgement of the weight she carried. The cameras caught her profile, sharp, unwavering, immortal. And in that instant, history didn't just record her, it anointed her. Outside the chamber, the world erupted. Headlines blazed across screens within minutes. Trump brought down by his own words. Crockett's final strike redefines the battle. America watches history. Social media fractured into chaos. One side celebrated with unrestrained fury, voices chanting Jasmine's name like it was already etched on monuments. The other side howled with disbelief, rage, betrayal, clinging to the fragments of a fallen idol. Every street, every home, every conversation pulsed with the aftershock. America had split into two oceans, each wave crashing against the other, each convinced the tide of history was theirs to command. But in the eye of that storm stood Jasmine, unshaken. Reporters swarmed the steps as she emerged, microphones thrust like spears, questions ricocheting in the frenzy. Congresswoman Crockett, how do you feel? Was this your plan from the start? Do you believe this will end Trump's career? She didn't answer them all. She didn't need to. She paused, letting the chaos simmer, and then spoke a single sentence that traveled farther than any headline could. Justice is not loud. Justice is lasting. The words rippled through the crowd, through the cameras, through the veins of a nation aching for clarity. For some, they were a promise. For others, a dagger. Meanwhile, Trump was led away. No applause, no roar of supporters, only the cold click of cameras capturing his every falter. He shouted something under his breath, about betrayal, about enemies, about a system rigged against him, but his words fell flat. The air had moved on. The world had moved on. And yet, the aftershocks would not fade easily. In diners, churches, factories, and boardrooms, arguments ignited. Some swore Jasmine had saved democracy. Others swore she had destroyed it. The divide grew sharper, louder, hungrier. But no matter which side people chose, they all agreed on one thing. The showdown had changed everything. Jasmine became more than a politician that day. She became a symbol. Her name carried the weight of defiance, her face etched into murals, her words replayed on loop. To many, she was the warrior who had stood against the storm and cut it down. To others, she was the spark that had lit a fire too wild to control. And Trump, he was no longer untouchable. His image, once sculpted in the marble of power, now lay fractured at the feet of history. The mask of strength had been ripped away, leaving only desperation behind. He would fight to crawl back, of course. Men like him always did. But the world had seen him bleed, and the world does not forget blood. As night fell, the echoes of the day still thundered across America. Some celebrated in the streets, waving flags, chanting Jasmine's name like a song of rebirth. Others clenched their fists in silence, vowing this war was not over. The nation trembled, pulled taut between pride and fury, hope and resentment. The battle had ended, but the war of voices had only begun. And somewhere, standing alone beneath the weight of 1,000 spotlights, Jasmine Crockett lifted her chin toward the sky, not as a victor basking in glory, but as a soldier ready for the battles still to come, because history had crowned her tonight. But tomorrow, it would test her. Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the chamber, the heavy wooden doors closing behind her with a thunderous echo that seemed to seal the night into legend. Flashbulbs flared, drowning the steps in white fire. The crowd outside surged forward, their voices colliding into a single roar. They weren't chanting for politics. They weren't chanting for parties. They were chanting for her. Jasmine! 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 Her gaze cut through the chaos, sharp, unflinching, proud. Not the look of someone intoxicated by applause, but the look of someone who had carried the weight of truth through fire and refused to let it burn her. Her stride was steady, her presence a fortress. Every step she took was history setting itself in stone. Supporters reached out their hands, desperate to touch even the air around her. Phones rose like stars, capturing the image of a woman who had become more than a congresswoman, more than a politician. She had become a symbol, the embodiment of defiance against lies, the living proof that justice, though battered, could still rise. Reporters screamed questions from every direction. Her team urged her forward, but Jasmine slowed. She turned, standing at the top of the marble steps, and lifted her chin toward the night sky that stretched vast and unbroken above Washington. The crowd hushed again. The city seemed to lean closer. Her voice carried, not booming, not theatrical, but steady, unwavering, cutting through the air like a blade of light. This fight was never about me. It was about truth. And tonight, truth stood its ground. The words rippled outward, carried on live feeds, replayed within seconds across every screen in America and far beyond. Her tone was not triumphant but resolute, as though she knew this moment was not the end, but the spark of something greater. She paused, scanning the faces before her, faces wet with tears, twisted in joy, hardened in defiance. And then she gave them the line that would outlive the night. The truth can be buried, but justice will always rise. For a beat, silence. Then an explosion of sound so fierce it shook the steps beneath her feet. The cheer was not just celebration, it was release. It was relief. It was the sound of people believing, if only for a moment, that justice still had teeth. Inside newsrooms, anchors scrambled to rewrite their scripts. Editorial boards redrafted headlines in real time. Historians scribbled notes, already certain that this was the speech they would teach in classrooms decades later. But Jasmine didn't linger in the glow. She descended the steps slowly, slipping into the crowd not as a goddess on a pedestal, but as a soldier returning from battle, scarred, weary, but unbroken. The cameras followed, yet somehow she seemed untouched by their gaze. The night clung to her like armor. Behind her, Trump's shadow still lingered. His downfall would dominate headlines. His fury would ignite followers. His name would not vanish overnight. But the night belonged to her, not because she had destroyed him, but because she had proven something larger, that lies, no matter how loud, could be split apart by the sharp edge of truth. The chants followed her down the avenue, echoing through the streets like hymns. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders, pointing to her as if pointing to a lesson, a warning, a beacon. She was not flawless, not untouchable, but in that moment she was theirs, the people's answer to the darkness. And as the motorcade finally pulled her away, the crowd didn't disperse. They lingered, singing, shouting, holding one another, unwilling to let go of the night that had given them something too rare to waste: hope. The cameras caught one last frame as her car vanished into the distance, an image that would flood magazines, textbooks, documentaries for generations to come. Her silhouette in the window, eyes forward, shoulders squared, unshaken. A leader forged not by ambition, but by fire. A warrior carrying the fragile weight of justice. Because some nights don't just end, They echo, they burn, they seed the future. And this night, the night Jasmine Crockett walked out of that chamber, was one of them. The truth can be buried, but justice will always rise. In the end, justice is not a weapon, but a mirror, revealing who we truly are when power tempts us to forget. Jasmine's stand was not just against one man, but against every lie that ever tried to silence the truth. We are reminded that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to rise despite it. And if one voice can ignite a chamber, imagine what many can do when joined in the name of what is right. Justice will always rise if we dare to rise with it. If this clash shook you, don't just move on. Carry it, share it, speak it aloud. Like, comment, and send this story to someone who still believes lies must be broken and justice must be heard. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth cuts deeper than power. Hit the bell because the fight isn't over. The next chapter isn't polished, it isn't safe, it's raw, and it may change the way you see justice itself. This story is a fictional dramatization, inspired by real struggles and real courage. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or symbolic, meant for reflection and critique. Thank you for watching. Justice doesn't arrive quietly. It rises because people demand it. This is Harrison Stories,